Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dialing In, and this is going to be the first in a series of a sub-series within the Dialing In series, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Let me explain. One of the most important settings I feel that we have on our Helix for dialing in tones is the microphone control within the cab block. We have a vast array of microphones that the fine folks at Line 6 have provided for us to be able to tweak our sounds, everything from condensers to dynamic to ribbon mics. There's really no end to the tonal possibilities we can have at our fingertips by rolling through these mics and the distance controls and whatnot. I've done videos before on microphones as a general topic, but I've never really specifically gone down to each individual microphone, and I think this might be a very beneficial series for some folks who may feel a little intimidated by exploring the different microphone selections. And I think if we know more about each particular mic in depth, it may allow us to not feel so intimidated and to be able to access different things that maybe we haven't tried that might inspire new tones or even fix problems that we have with some of our existing tones. So today I'm going to start off by talking about one of my favorite mics, the Royer Labs R121 ribbon mic. I actually owned this microphone for many years. When I was running a studio, much before I was using digital modeling, I would use this microphone. I'd recorded saxophone with it. I've recorded many guitar tracks with it. I've recorded vocals with it, acoustic guitar, many different sources. And I have to say, it's probably one of my favorite microphones that I've ever used, and we're lucky enough to have it within our Helix. So let's do this. Let's go over to HX Edit and take a look and see what we can come up with using this fabulous R121 model microphone that we have in the Helix. So here we are in HX Edit, and let me just describe to you what I've done here. I threw a reverb block at the end, as I always want, just to avoid the totally dry sound of direct recording guitars. So it's only there very subtly, just to add a little ambience to the sound. I do have a high and low shelf EQ, which is turned off right now. We're gonna talk about that in a couple minutes. And I just literally took the Placator Dirty Amp and added that block. I didn't touch anything. This is how it comes up stock. And then I added to that one of my favorite cabs in the Helix, which is the 412 Greenback 25. I have two snapshots. You might be wondering why I have one using the SM57 dynamic mic and one where it switches to the R121 ribbon. So that's the 121 ribbon is the Royer Labs R121 ribbon. Both at 1 inch back. I've turned the low and high cuts off. So we're just comparing the microphones. Now you might say, well, why did you use the 57 dynamic? Well, arguably that's probably one of the most popular microphones ever used to record guitar tracks in history. Probably some of the most classic guitar tones we've heard have been recorded with possibly nothing but an SM57, or possibly an SM57 in conjunction with quite often a Royer R121. We're not going to be combining mics today. So let's talk about the 121 first. The Royer R121 is a ribbon microphone. It is a figure 8 microphone, meaning that it picks up sound from the front and from the back and rejects sound from the side. So if you look at the pickup pattern in the front and the back, if you turn that this way, you would see kind of a figure 8 pickup pattern, and that's why they call it that. It's also a bidirectional mic. The SM57 is a cardioid mic, which picks up just mostly in the front, a little bit from the sides, and rejects sound from the back. That's a unidirectional mic or a cardioid mic because of the pickup pattern almost having the shape of a heart to it. One thing that's interesting about both cardioid and figure 8 microphones is that they have something called proximity effect. When we move them very close to the source, we get a big bass boost out of them. This is something that can be either a problem or it can be something very useful for us. Sometimes if a sound is too boomy, we simply back the microphone off of the source and it fixes the problem. Think of the stereotypical radio voice where you have somebody with a big booming voice, and that is usually because they are right on top of that microphone. They are getting a lot of proximity effect, and it's giving a nice fullness and body to their voice. So it can be a positive or a negative. Well, for guitar, it really depends on what you're looking for sound-wise, but I think it's important knowing that, because when we do feel it's too boomy and there's too much proximity effect, by simply backing it off a couple inches or more, we can take care of that problem. And that's going to come in handy when we start using our distance control in HX Edit in our cab blocks. The type of microphone that will have the greatest proximity effect would be a figure-8 microphone like the Royer R121. The second most proximity effect we're going to have would be from a cardioid mic like the SM57. And then we get into omnidirectional mics, which pick up equally all around the mic. They do not have any proximity effect at all. That's just a side point. It doesn't really pertain to anything we're talking about here. Now this is important. You might be asking, why am I talking about that? Well, we do have a distance control in our cab block, like I mentioned. So you're going to notice that the closer we have that microphone to the source, we're going to get more fullness and body out of it. But I want to do something else. I went to find from the Shure site and the Royer site the frequency response graph for each microphone. And I want to show you that now to compare them so you can visually see the difference between the sound of these microphones. So here we have the frequency graph for the Royer R121 and for the Shure SM57. Both graphs go from 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz along the bottom. And the decibel range in the Shure SM57 one peaks out up here at +10, -10. It goes beyond that, whereas the R121 isn't as extended. But we do see where our +5 and +10 benchmarks are here. So what we notice is the SM57 has a very large roll off, starting where? Up around 200 Hertz, and it rolls off. By the time it gets to 50 Hertz, it's 10 dB down. Even at 100 Hertz, it's 5 dB down already. We notice with the R121 that it is extremely flat, actually. I think it's ±3 dB across this whole spectrum from 35 Hertz all the way up to 20,000 Hertz. Pretty impressive stuff. It has a little boost at 60 Hertz. Fairly flat all the way up to 100. Pulls back a little bit in these low mids, which is actually something I really, really like on electric guitar. Very flat through the mid-range, a little tiny bump of a couple dB here through around 2 to 5,000 Hertz, and then it rolls off on the high end. Where there isn't going to be a lot of super useful guitar information, but sometimes we can get some harshness up there. And I think you can see by this why the Royer R121 is such a useful mic for so many sources. Relatively flat. In comparison, we come over to the SM57 and we see this huge boost of about 5 dB. Maybe even a little bit more than that, in around 5,000 or 6,000 Hertz, where it's still boosted all the way up to, what is that, probably around 13,000 Hertz before it has a dramatic roll off above that. So there's going to be a lot more sizzle in this microphone. It has a slight roll off in the 300 to 500 range, which is also very nice, not quite as broad as the R121. So when you compare these two, you can really understand why they're going to sound so different. So back over here on HX Edit then, here is the sound of this preset, which is just the stock settings of the Placator Dirty as they come up into the Greenback 25 with a dab of reverb on it. Nothing else fancy going on here. So this is the SM57, and you'll see Snapshot 2 switches to the 121 ribbon mic. So SM57 sound is as such. Now let's switch over to the R121. You're going to hear a dramatic difference. Now the problem is, and this is what I've heard from a lot of folks, is when they pull up the R121 like this, they go, yeah, that's not usable. Muddy, there's no high end, there's nothing's cutting in the mix. It's really awful. The Royer mic is going to have a little bit of work done to it, but it retains something very nice when you add EQ to it. It takes EQ very, very well. Now remember what we said about the proximity effect. If you remember our graphs, we don't really need to pull the SM57 too far back. It naturally rolls off a lot of the low end, whereas the R121 doesn't. So if I go back to the SM57, right out of the gate, that low end is kind of under control, maybe even slightly thin sounding. But going to sit very nicely in a mix. I guess my problem with the SM57 is up in the upper register. And It always sounds a little bit bitey to my ear, but again, that's just my opinion. And sometimes in certain situations, that's gonna be exactly what I want. But for the most part, it's not my go-to mic, even though it is very popular. And again, that's not to say that you shouldn't use it. It's a spectacular mic and has been used on many, many tracks for very obvious reasons. It's a great microphone and very inexpensive. You know, something like the Royer mic is somewhere well over $1,000, whereas an SM57 I think can be purchased for 89 bucks, 99 bucks, somewhere in that range. I haven't looked recently, but I know they are very inexpensive. So real great bang for the buck there. But there is something very special happening in the low end on the Royer mic. So the first thing I do when dialing in the Royer mic is I go to my distance control. Right now we're getting maximum proximity effect. As I roll that back, you're going to hear that clean up a bit. Now when you compare that to the 57, we have that low end under control more. What if we pull that back some more, go another couple inches? Compare that to when it's 1 inch back. Hear that woofy proximity effect. We go 7 inches back. Compare it to the 57. Obviously way more bite on the 57. Look at the frequency graphs on them. There's a big boost up in the upper mids on that, right? But what I like about this is if I come back now, maybe go 6 inches back or even 5 inches back on the R121, there's something very magical to me about the low end, a certain squish, I don't know how else to put it. Having used this mic in real life, I can tell you this is exactly how it reacts and what it sounds like when you use it in real life on a real cabinet and you move it around. It's really a well done model here that we have. So we're going to leave that at 5 inches, but one thing I'm going to do, bring in the low and high shelf EQ. This is kind of the trick, I think, to making the R121 very quickly work better than almost any other microphone. So I'm going to go on a low frequency around 450, maybe even 500. And I'm just going to roll out another maybe 2 dB. And I'm going to come up here to around 4,000 hertz and I'm going to just gently put in a couple dB. Now, let's turn that off. Here's our sound of our 121 ribbon pulled, what did we have, 6 inches back, I believe? 5 inches back. Sounds like this. Put our high and low shelf on. Compare that to the 57. Now I think on the 57 version, there's a little more volume. So I'm going to come in here and just pull that back a couple dB. There, now we can hear a more equal comparison. If you were to I mean about the R121. It has sort of a magical bottom and low mids on it that just sounds beautiful to me. I really like it. But now you might say, well, I want more bite out of it. Well, we could come into our high gain and boost that up almost as much as we want, as the R121 really handles EQ very nicely. Compared to the SM57. We sort of, in my opinion, turned it into a better sounding SM57 with just pulling the back, so we get rid of some of that proximity effect, back about 5 inches, roll some of that low end off, and then come in here with a simple high and low shelf, and we can kind of create whatever we want with it, but still retaining some of the magic qualities of that ribbon mic. Now you might even want more sizzle. What happens if we just go silly about this and crank it up? Compare that to the 57. We bring the volume back up a touch on the 57 again, now that we've rolled so much EQ in on the R121. So we've almost made it into very, very similar sounds to the SM57, but still retaining a nicer bottom end, in my opinion. And again, that's a very drastic example with EQ. I, probably wouldn't go that much, but. And if you did, maybe you don't want to roll the lows off quite as much. Maybe not at all. So that's why I love the Royer R121 mic so much, and it's a real go-to of mine. Now, I don't use it for everything. Sometimes I'll go with a different ribbon mic, but I do use the ribbon mics extensively. And sometimes I do just throw in the SM57 because it just works perfect. I don't want any of that fullness in the bottom end. Maybe I want something a little bit thinner. Beautiful thing to do also is to mix the two, which I'll cover in a different video, which I have talked about in the past. But I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into that particular mic, and maybe will, take the fear factor away from going to it and listening to it and going, oh, what a muddy mess, that's no good, right? Distance control and a little bit of EQ, or maybe a lot of EQ, are gonna be your best friend with that, and we can dial it in like we would in a normal studio if we were using real amps, but we can do it very, very quickly. We add a block, we roll that distance back, we add a block, we touch up the EQ a little bit with these as starting points, and you can tweak, the high frequency and low frequency to different frequency points to get whatever you really desire. But once you understand that and have that workflow going, it becomes a very easy thing to do. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that was useful, and I really do hope it helped some folks to maybe not feel so intimidated by going in and messing around with microphones that maybe they normally wouldn't feel as comfortable with. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Please share the video with anybody who you think would get use out of it, and spread the word about the channel. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. Thank you guys so much for for tuning in and sharing some time with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back really soon with some more content. Ciao for now.